Good afternoon. My name is Nuno Calaim and this is Connected, the podcast from Nova Economics Club. Today, we are going to turn our attention to the relationship between democracy and economic growth. We are going to start with a brief introduction on the matter, moving to a discussion on some of the channels that make the connection between democratic institutions and economic growth, and finally, we are going to talk a little bit about the future. To bring us light on the topic, we have here with us Professor José Tavares. Hi.
Hello.
Who holds a PhD in economics from Harvard University and is currently a professor of economics here at Nova SB. He's also a researcher at the Center for Economic Policy Research in London. Professor José Tavares, welcome to our podcast and thank you for being here with us today. So let's start with a brief introduction to the topic and then we are going to move to the questions. Some research has been published recently by economists like Robert Barro, in which an empirical relation between democracy and lower rates of economic growth is discussed. Professors José Tavares and Romain Vaxiarg have explained this link previously studied empirically, concluding that, on the one hand, democracy leads to an increase in the growth of rates of the stock of human capital and to a decrease in inequality. These two factors positively impact the rate of economic growth. Is this right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. On the other hand, democracy leads to an increase in government consumption and to a decrease in the rates of accumulation of the stock of physical capital. Um, assuming that um, assuming that government consumption is based on a distortionary tax rate and also considering its benefits, we have to consider a trade-off between these two effects. And assuming that the effect of distortionary taxation is stronger, we can conclude that these two factors are responsible for a decrease in the growth rate. So overall, the effect on the growth rate of the first two mentioned factors is not as strong as the effect on the growth rate of the last two mentioned factors. So, according to the before mentioned study, it can be said that democratic institutions have an indirect effect on the rate of economic growth, decreasing it. Let's start with a question exploring the one that may be the least intuitive relationship that you make in your article. That is the relationship between reducing income inequality and economic growth. Why does reducing income inequality have a positive effect on the growth rate? Yeah, that's the question.
So the importance of this study with Roman Vaxiarg is that first we studied an important issue, democracy, and people care about democracy. So it's very touchy to go into the mechanics of democracy. How does it have positive effects on the one hand, negative effects on the other? So this is one of the important. As you mentioned rightly, we have to think of trade-offs. And if you think of even the public discourse today, even about democracy, but also about many other issues, people don't think about the trade-offs. So one of the missions we have as people that try to think deeply about the issues is usually there are trade-offs, even with democracy. Even if we want to have more democracy, we should be aware of some of the costs. One of the benefits of democracy, there are many, but one of the empirical growth benefits of democracy is that democracies tend to lead to lower inequality, and inequality is not socially a positive thing. So inequality can lead to political instability. We have some indicators of that, but also social instability and mistrust. There's a long line of economists studying social capital, and inequality is a destructor of social capital because people tend to feel less
Valued.
less valued and less empathetic if they feel the society is very very unequal. So that's one of the positive impacts of democracy on growth.
Okay. Thank you. And now let's discuss another question also related with income inequality. The gains from economic growth are not evenly distributed. There are research has global income distribution from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the Great Recession by Christoph Leichner and Branko Milanovic. in which the authors compile a graph known as the elephant curve that shows that economic growth is not evenly distributed across income levels. Although democracies are usually associated with a lower rate of economic growth, can we say that this growth is more evenly distributed in democracies than in non-democratic countries? So, is the elephant curve flatter in democracies than in non-democratic regimes?
So the elephant curve, I'm not aware of evidence that compares directly democracies and non-democracies, but several things are true. One is that democracies tend to grow at lower rates on average, but lower rates or more moderate rates, let's put it this way. But they are, even the growth rates are less unequal over time. So you can have some kind of autocracies that grow fast. We know of several examples, grow at 7, 8%, 6%. But there are many more autocracies that grow at very low or negative rates. So when you, from the economic point of view, democracy can be seen as an insurance mechanism. It tends to average out. You will not. It's difficult to get tremendous results because you have rights to respect, civil and social rights, but it's also very difficult to have very dismal performance because people are booted out. Okay. So that's one thing. So on the elephant curve, I'm not aware that there is direct evidence of a difference, but probably the same type of mechanism exists all across the developed economies, which has to do with a top tier of the society that grows very fast. Whose incomes grow very fast because they are connected with the global economy. Then there are people at the lower end of the distribution that also benefit. So you can think of people that clean houses, that take care of the elderly. Some of these are seeing their income grow fast because they are providing service to whom? To people that are very connected to the global economy. And then in Western democracies and North America, the middle is kind of threatened. Why? Because they are facing now new competition from the middle class in India and China that are competing for the same type of jobs through industry, through other intermediaries. So this kind of elephant curve is of course a very elegant name, heavy elegant name, but it's probably a picture of what we will have in developed economies for a long time.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And now, going back to the paper you wrote about this issue, there is an assumption that there is a higher accumulation of human capital in democracies than in non-democratic regimes, principally through the public funding of the educational system. How does the accumulation of human capital contribute to the growth rate, and how important is the accumulation of human capital to the growth rate of economies?
Okay, so the education usually has a great impact on the economy when it comes through public funding. So there is no way you can have widespread education without public funding. And most democracies recognize that. For instance, you see even in Hollywood movies, the primary schooling of in the frontier going pari passu with the movement of settlers towards the West. So the connection between public education and democracy is very, very important. Why does it matter? Because if you notice, today we are not anymore industrial economies. So industry is very important. The richest countries in Europe are countries that have a substantial element of industry, say Germany probably around 17-18% of GDP, but all the developed economies have the largest sector, which is services. And if you think about services, has to use human capital. So it needs a higher level of education that usually is provided willingly by by the public sector. Okay, if you think even in historical terms, something that some people like to flirt with, for instance, I don't want to call it that because it's not that, but Marxism theory of economics completely ignores services, completely ignores public human capital, completely ignores social capital. So it's completely an industrial, very, very 19th century backward view of the world. The world is not that anymore. So uh, all the advancements in economic theory are towards making the determinants of growth more abstract. Human capital, social capital, things that are very hard to come together, to bring together. Uh, this mechanical view of growth that actually is still in our models, capital and labor. Capital and labor.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the only major contribution of Marxism to it's the denomination of these two factors. They are really not the whole story anymore. So, for instance, if you talk of labor, what are you talking about? In countries where women cannot go access the job market, labor is one thing, is mostly men, and it's very restricted. In countries where women access the market very easily, and there are policies for that, suddenly labor is double. So a lot of social issues that are very hard to study and cannot be simplified as they have been in the past lead to economic growth.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we can move on to the next question. Which so China has been the great powerhouse of this century. For example, its growth rate from 2000 has been around 8%, accounting with the pandemic years, while the United States has been around 2%. Is China a good example um, to explain the relationship between undemocratic regimes and perhaps a greater economic growth? And do you think that China will be able to keep its current growth trajectory if it begins to democratize itself?
So I think the major explanation of the high growth of China versus the relative low growth of
Hmm.
the US is a phenomenon that you probably studied named convergence.
Yes.
Poorer countries tend to grow faster. It's very easy to be dumbfounded with the size of the Chinese economy. But the fact that we are kind of discussing which one is larger, US or China, given the population, means that the average Chinese is about 1/3 to 1/4 income per capita, holds the 1/4 of the income per capita of the average American. So these are completely different realities.
Okay.
So what I mean is convergence explains the difference in growth rates so far. The other thing is I'm almost sure China will not go back to 7-8% growth ever again. It's going to go down precisely because of convergence. One of the reasons. And I think this is very clear for the Chinese leadership. They are very worried about this. And there is evidence that when you have autocratic regimes, the people, if the economy is not growing as much as they want or expect, they turn to the regime. In democracies, it's very easy. You have an escape valve because you vote the party out and you have another party with other proposals. Maybe it will give you again 2% growth, but the faces change. Autocracies in general are very vulnerable to decreasing growth rates. So I think what you're going to see in the next 10, 15, 20 years is a China where the government has to accommodate the expectations of individuals in terms of growth, and it's not easy because a lot of the Chinese are still relatively poor. Fortunately, not passing through things like famine that happened there in the past and in other places. They have had tremendous progress, but now the expectations are very high, and the regime has to put up something on the table.
Okay. That's an interesting answer to the question. Thank you. And now the last question, which is Thomas Piketty affirms in his book Capital in the 21st Century that from now on, developed economies will experience lower growth rates than the ones they have experienced in the past. So around 1.2% is the value he uses in the book. Do you think that if perceived by people, there is a chance that non-democratic ideologies will become more popular amongst the electorate? I mean, if democracies fail to deliver results in growth, do you think that undemocratic ideologies will have a special attention from the electorate as a result, as a solution to that problem?
Yes, I think I agree with Piketty, and this is not easy for me to say, but I will say it. I agree insofar as he says that the economies will grow at lower rates. And it's precisely because they are relatively wealthy economies, and now you have competition from countries like India, China, that are nibbling at some of the gains. The problem is that with relatively low rates, there are some people that are worse off than the previous generation, and that is happening everywhere, everywhere in the Western developed economies. So it's happening in Europe, it's happening in the United States, it's happening in other places. So that is a threat in the sense that these unsatisfied people will look for solutions and look for simplistic solutions, maybe. But I'm not as pessimistic as the press. I think that there is a discussion of this topic that is very superficial in some sense. Let's be clear about one thing. Populists, the majority of the populists are not against democratic regime. They stretch the regime to its limit sometimes they don't, but they are not against the regime. Let's be clear about one thing. The important thing is liberal democracy. Liberal democracy is a democracy where you not only vote, but you respect the adversaries, political adversaries, as long as they fall within some line. For instance, they do not incite hate or violence, they do not discriminate, which is an important word, against minorities, things that are generally in the Constitution. Let's be clear, a lot of the people that are waging the animal of populism are themselves populists. And we see a lot of people sitting down. We have seen this in elections, for instance, in our country and in others. People sitting down with a populist, and they don't like the populist. I can relate to that. But then they want to shut up the populist with non-legal weapons. So I've seen debates where the populist says, I respect you, and the other person says, I want to forbid your party. So let's be clear. The liberal democracies are under threat, but they are not necessarily under threat only for the reasons of populism. Fortunately, and we go back, ideologies that are much worse than the current populist ideologies that are totalitarian, that want to force people to think all the same, those ideologies have failed, have visibly failed, have failed for reasons that are obvious, namely millions of people dead are obvious reasons, and so these ideologies are no longer popular. So one of the natural reaction of people that put their bets in these ideologies is to say, oh, we are going to have the end of democracy. Listen, saving democracy every week is too tiresome. A lot of people that are waging the banner of let's save democracy are not worried about democracy, are trying to shut up their adversaries. So a lesson for your generation and the other generations coming, the problem of democracy is not right-wing populism, left-wing populism, is Manichaeism. Anytime you hear someone coming to the table and saying, I'm the good person, you are the bad person, I'm going to shut you up, this person is threatening democracy, wherever it comes from. So this is my message to you and to your the sons when you have, because this is what is important. Everything else is not important. One other thing, I think we lost time, we don't have time, but I'm going to say, economics, seriously taken, is one of the best weapons against populism wherever it comes. Because populism, economists look at data, economists don't believe that they have the final answer, they are always ready to revise the answer with new data, with new arguments, and they are willing to debate forever, looking for better solutions. So be aware that anytime people attack economics, namely academic economics, in general, they want to shut up this force for democracy and this force for truth, because truth is not there for the picking. Truth is something that we have to work towards. And so that's my final message to economics and management students. You are part of the force for democracy, so stay at it.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you a lot. And this concludes our podcast. Once again, thank you, Professor José Tavares, for joining us. And for the people listening to us, I hope you enjoyed it, and please stay connected.